David Blood is the Managing Director of Generation Investment Management. It's one of the first firms to focus on sustainability and one of the largest players in the space and very successful. And if you talk to David's colleagues, they'll tell you he's one of the fiercest people in the movement, and we need more of those in the financial industry. So, Mindy's group series organized the Investors Summit on Climate Risk in February. I think co-hosted that along with a couple of other organizations, and there were several hundred investors there. And I think your staff wrote an article, Mindy, that I pulled up, where they described the agreement as a three-legged stool and identified that one of the biggest risks was capital, and that without capital, this was going to be a three-legged stool without a leg and was going to tip over. Mindy mentioned $350 billion got deployed last year. How do we turn that into trillions, and how do we mobilize more capital into the space?
Well, I think there are a couple of perspectives we should consider. The first is, and this is in some ways good news, but it's also daunting. When we think about making a transition to a more sustainable economy, a more sustainable world, and I know we're going to talk a lot more about that here this morning, we need to go beyond thinking about it just as energy. When to get to where we need to get to, everything we've done thus far this morning will need to change. So it's not just energy, it's mobility, it's food, it's agriculture, it's lighting, it's resources, utilization of resources, it's finance actually, it's consumer products, it's technology in every respect, digitalization. These are both challenges and opportunities. And when we begin to broaden what the opportunity set is and recognize that there are a number of things that need to change, you can begin to imagine how this can happen. And you can imagine it happening more quickly, which I'll get to in a minute. So I think we need to recognize that the opportunity set is really quite significant here. And of course, that's the bad news, is quite significant. There is a significant amount of capacity building that needs to happen to make this transition more effective. Part of it is disclosure of climate risk, and there we can talk about that as well. That's something that I'm focused on. It's I think a recognition that we're not going to have to make a trade-off. And this is part of what Al was trying to say yesterday about the opportunities that we face, and they're significant, and why we will change. But historically, people have thought about, well, we either are going to have to we either will live in a carbon world or a non-carbon world, but the non-carbon world is not a good world. And we're going to have to give up growth and all sorts of things to make this transition. That's just fundamentally not true, and particularly in an environment where economies are struggling to grow, the opportunity to invest in a low-carbon economy will slowly but surely resonate with people. And the last thing that I want to mention, sort of as an opening, is I don't think the capital markets, and indeed maybe a number of folks who've been involved in this movement for a while, recognize the urgency of the problem. This is, I think, I came here 10 years ago, and I've been here many times over these years, and I think maybe the last time I was here was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. If I'm here in 4 years' time, and we have not significantly flattened the carbon curve, we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
So what this means is that we cannot have incremental change. We need to think about scale change. We need to think about it in an urgent way. And we're going to need to prioritize what are the actions that we must take imminently, the next 12, 24, 36 months, to have a chance of bending that curve and then getting to the point where we can get to zero carbon in 2050.
Yeah.